We begin with money because markets, they expose power in real time. Just yesterday, on October 8th, the Russian stock market had a terrible case of panic selling. Local headlines in Russia said it is the largest loss to the Moscow Stock Exchange since September 2022. This all follows a statement from the Russian Foreign Ministry that relations with the United States were beginning to sour. Capital repriced risk while the ruble faced pressure. And though the officials claimed stability, the screens were flashing red. We can estimate that if it's true that it lost about 4% of its value, that means about $21 billion vanished. That's about 1% of Russia's GDP. That's about 7 weeks of Russian defense spending. The markets are reacting to a regime that today is running out of lies. My name is Jason Smart. I'm a special correspondent for the Kiev Post and a national security advisor. The situation in Russia is not looking good. The Moscow Stock Exchange began to slide for one simple reason. Investors in Russia want to see an end to this war. They realize that this war is draining their country. Their country does not have any hope if it continues. And that's why they don't want to have rubles, something that very soon could become monopoly money. And that's why today, despite the fact that the press says all is well in Russia, we know it's not. We see the economic damage across Russia. We see on the front that Russia is losing territory. And across Russia itself, the Russian people are fed up. They think the situation has become hopeless. So this sell-off was not something small. This was something very big, because it was not a coincidence but a reaction. The investors see on the ground what the officials deny. The investors see the foundations of war power collapsing. And this all starts with the fact that Russia's most valuable asset in its military, its soldiers, are beginning to run away. In 1917, we saw something similar. The elites sensed the army's fracture, even before the Tsar did. And we saw how that worked out for the Tsar. Now today, the human power within the Russian military is disappearing. Over 50,000 Russian soldiers have deserted. The cases have accelerated, especially in the South and the North Caucasus. And human rights groups say that those soldiers who are caught before they are sentenced are assigned to assault units. They're sent off to die. It's absurd, and this creates no cohesion in the Russian military. This will not help Russia to win. What history teaches us is that history is a prologue. Though it does not repeat, it does often rhyme. So what we see today does in fact remind us of 1917, the mass desertions that hollowed the Russian front as the officers lost authority. In the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, the Soviet Unions were humiliated by their ongoing losses, as soldiers there turned to drugs and did everything they could to avoid service. All of this is because the Russian military doesn't care about its soldiers. It's very obvious they don't care about their wounds or about their families. They only care about headcount. And the Tsarist army, it was very big into punishing its soldiers. But that's why it's not very surprising that it completely collapsed by 1917. The pressure today is going to intensify. Because these assaults, why would somebody want to go into assault when their wages oftentimes do not go paid? Commanders are sending men into these zero-return assault units. They don't even give them enough ammunition. The entire penal logic substitutes for leadership in the Russian military. It's accelerating the front losses. And all of this is due to the fact that today Russia cannot afford this war. It does not have the resources, economically, with human talent, or with machinery. And an army that cannot control its men cannot control its supply lines. Chaos in the ranks now mirrors the chaos on the railways. And investors, they see exactly the alignment of failures. In 1905, strikes and mutinies converged with rail turmoil to create regime shock. The breakdown in command now appears across the country. Look at the rails, look at the depots. A blast hit the Stroganova-Mishinskaya stretch south of St. Petersburg. A military freight there derailed and blocked the corridor. The St. Petersburg-Pskov route halted for hours waiting for the clearance. 2 more freight trains were also sabotaged just in September of this year. This is near St. Petersburg, and there is sabotage going on the railways. Think about how bad the situation is in Russia. If within the country, people are beginning to rebel. We saw that one of the freights was carrying oil products. Already, there's a huge backlog. This will just create more pressure. Rerouting, of course, is going to create more backlogs, but it's also going to create cascading delays. We saw that the government has cut off the internet in the region, they say to prevent drone strikes. But the reality? Because they don't want the people to communicate. They don't want the people to know what is really going on. They certainly don't want the people to know that the logistics are interrupted. They don't want the people to know that people within Russia are rising up against the state. And the Trans-Siberian bottleneck back in 1904, 1905 exposed the same sort of overreach and the slow supply. Think about Austria-Hungary in 1918, the rail failures that amplified the battlefield collapses. Now, speaking of things burning within Russia, there is something very good which I wish to mention. As you know, we've been fundraising for drones, and those of you who wish to help Ukraine get more drones, please see the first comment below, which I will pin, where you can donate for the life-saving drones for the Ukrainian soldiers. But we have something very exciting going on, which will be announced later this week, I hope, about what is going on with our drones. They are doing really great things. So anyone who has donated, I thank you, as do the Ukrainian soldiers. Take a look at the explosions just earlier today that we saw in Volgograd. There, one of the largest oil refineries in Russia was attacked. This is not going to make things any better for the Putin regime. Or look at the explosions that preceded a fire at the Zavod Pripov. That's an electronics plant. That plant is very important for the Russian military. It creates the microcircuits for drones, for communications, for guidance. All of it is now offline. Every lost batch extends repair cycles. It means that the entire system that is dependent on them is slowed down. And today, the Russians don't have a lot of options. This reminds us of the Soviet Union, where factories after the Afghan attrition struggled to meet repair demands. But today, fuel scarcity in the occupied territories and in Crimea, it's tightening for everybody, not just for the military. There's already a cap of 30 liters, which is about 8 gallons per transaction. But this freeze, being unable to buy fuel, is something that affects all of the Russian economy. Moscow restricted fuel exports and is confirming that there are already shortages across the country. And it's incredible enough that some people say that things are fine in Russia. There are no shortages. I repeat, Moscow says there are shortages. It seems very clear to me. But we continue. The real burden today, though, is that Russia is lacking in the most fundamental things it needs. Its factories that it has to produce weapons are being attacked. The ones that make the microelectronics, they are burning. And the oil refineries that produce the cash needed to pay for all these things are exploding. Ukraine is systematically exploiting Russia's rear. It is doing it deliberately and regularly. And each one of these attacks is turning into a greater disaster for Russia. They are all cascading. Each one plays on the next. Ukraine is turning these delays into leverage. They are doing it with precision and with reach. Look at the Long Neptune. It adapts an anti-ship missile for land targets. External tank pushes reach toward about 1,000 kilometers or about 620 miles. Deep strikes on the refineries and industrial nodes, they only compound the disaster we see in the railways. The downtime is costing all of Russia. But today the partisan activity is fascinating. To think that there are so many things going on within Russia, all at the same time. These coordinated sabotage, the slowing of fuel, the slowing of the munitions, the attacks on different plants, all of this is making it possible for Russia to wage war. And this is not the first time in Russian history. This has happened before. Russian history is very interesting in that respect. It repeats itself quite regularly. And despite the idea that Russia always wins, nothing could be further from the truth. Russia has lost plenty of times in history. It's not guaranteed to win. It lost to the Japanese, and it had its navy destroyed. It lost Port Arthur. It also lost Crimea to Turkey and to Britain and its allies. The fact is, Russia regularly loses. And the way that it loses, it usually looks a lot like this. Russia does what it can, but let's be honest, it can't do very much. It's quite limited. Ukraine today is able to attack within Russia and attack things that are of great needs for the Russians. And to highlight how bad the situation really has become inside of Russia, some numbers have recently come out. There was a leak. So the depletion at this point is pretty drastic. Well, look at tanks, for instance. About 35% remain in storage overall. However, only about 19% are operational or repairable. Look at the infantry fighting vehicles. About 35% remain in storage. However, only about 16% are restorable. Look at the armed personnel carriers. About 45% remain in storage. However, only about 39% are usable. Look at artillery. Around 39% of pre-war stocks have continued to survive, but the majority of them already have heavy wear, and it's not sure if they work. And there's a historical precedent. Look at 1918. The exhausted empires issued threats, but they could not sustain them. Russia today likes to threaten. It's what it always does. It today is threatening that if the United States gives tomahawks to Ukraine, that there'll be a response, a firm response. But the fact is, what can they do? They like to use the nuclear saber rattling. But in the end, it means nothing. It means absolutely nothing. Because today, Russia doesn't have the capacity to continue fighting. It doesn't have the money, it doesn't have the soldiers, and it doesn't have the equipment. Strategic desperation is growing because of the failing ranks, the shattered logistics. That risk is exactly what the market priced today. This Moscow Stock Exchange showed us that this fall was not in a vacuum. It was a reaction to the emptying stockpiles, a disintegrating manpower base. And back in 1991, black market ruble rates and shortages revealed the collapse before there was the breakup. We saw very similar things happen not too long ago. And all of this has a chain effect. All of these things are interrelated. The desertions, they are degrading the military, degrading every unit of the Russian military. And this is breaking the command authority. Broken authority exposes rails to sabotage and to delays. Delays magnify the effect of Ukrainian range and partisans. The deep strikes stretch repair crews and spare inventories thin. Drones are exhausting the stockpiles of Russia, and it's making it impossible for Russia to bring these stocks to the war. And the empty nuclear rhetoric that we hear from Russia, it's nothing more than compensation for the shortfalls that it faces. Today, the markets are connecting the dots for the Kremlin. The Kremlin might want to deny it, but the market sees it. Russia cannot win. So today, we see something very clear. Guns decide battles, and money decides wars. The ledgers, the rails, the ranks all tell one story. Every short-term patch widens the long-term break. Russia today is collapsing. Thank you for watching. Please like this video. Please subscribe to the channel. Send this video to others and leave your comments below. And consider becoming a channel member. And, as always, thank you for supporting Ukraine.
Why do Ukrainians love Kharkiv so much? Well, let's see. It's historical, it's modern, intellectual, it's colorful yet brutal, it's amusing yet scientific, faithful yet secular. The second largest city in Ukraine, the size of Munich, or 3 Lisbons. Named after a Cossack, it raised many famous Ukrainians, scientists, sportsmen, pilots, musicians, writers. It was students from Kharkiv who came up with the glory to Ukraine. The largest square in Europe is Kharkiv's Freedom Square. It's where the Queen performed in 2008. Yeah, that legendary place. The oldest operating cinema in Eastern Europe is Kharkiv's Bomber. It has one of the largest markets in the world, a dozen of universities, the first Ukrainian skyscraper, its own unique dialect, even a cable car road, if you will. A city of culture, progress, and people of iron will. Kharkiv stands strong, despite everyday terror by Russia.